Okay, hello everybody. Today's date is May 19th. May 19th. Hold on. May 19th, 2021. And my name is Leslie Williams. Now, hold on one second. Let's see if anything happens that disrupts this video from being made. And anything that happens that causes it to not be able to be uploaded. Now, this is going to probably be a two-part video series. This is going to be a two-part video, making it a video series because this phone only allows me to make 33-minute videos at a time. So here we go. The subject matter of this particular video, it's called the CIA Hyper Game Theory. And Brian 2, go to YouTube and type in Brian 2, TEW, electronic harassment. Now, so what's being reported on a massive scale, including by scientists like Dr. Robert Duncan, go to Google and type in Dr. Robert Duncan, The Matrix Deciphered. And again, go to Google and type in Brian 2, TEW, Dr. Eric Karlstrom, The Two Hypothesis. And you can also go to YouTube and type in Brian 2, Jeff Rense, RENSCE, okay, CIA, the CIA mind control. You want to look for that video. Once I get this video published, I'll be putting some links in the description of this video because this video will be transferred to YouTube and in the Exposing Courts YouTube channel. So just be patient. It might not get put there right away. It might take me about a week to put it in there, so just be patient. Now, Brian 2, concerning part of the two hypotheses, he openly states in many interviews that are online that the individuals who are targeted through this crime are neurally attached to what is known as a supercomputer. The main individuals that are all over the internet to be massively implicated in hosting this demonic crime are the CIA, the NSA, the DOD, and the DIA. Now that's the main four parties that Brian 2 is exposing. Hold on. That is the main four parties that Brian 2 is exposing on the internet. Now, so anyways, you should also research how Gangstalking victims are reported to be used for non-consensual human experimentation projects. This is all over the internet, exposed in tens and tens of thousands of posts, YouTube videos. Doctors, scientists, researchers, and tens of thousands of victims are all exposing the same thing, pertaining to how this program forces itself upon the Gangstalking victims' life experiences. And this is done through many, many, many different means. If you can force abuse, trauma, psychological trauma, physical trauma, and the other techniques of this demonic crime against a human being, against their will, one of the main things that this crime does is that it uses your perceptions, your hearing, and your sight, and that's got to do with brain entrainment. Now, one of the main goals of this crime concerning the brain entrainment aspect of it is by and through forcing the victim to notice what's propped up, visually and or auditorily. So the auditorial and visual entrainment can take place. Now, whenever any human being is forced to endure identical behaviors by and through props that are propped up through the community-based gang stalking and through any remote technologies that are being intentionally, remotely inflicted upon the gang stalking victim's body and or brain, just Google all the technologies that are reported to be used for torture connected to gang stalking, then you can obviously see that a lot of the Brian 2 hypothesis rings true. It fits like a glove. So let me backtrack for a second. Now, when you look at the sensitization method of gang stalking, you can see that these little psychotic rats who host this crime prop up useful idiots, lowlifes, and dum-dums along the victim's route in order to engage in physical gestures, color coding, okay, and much more, and certain specific sounds they want the victim sensitized to, any type of sound. This is all over the internet, absolutely. So when you research the sensitization method of gang stalking, the direct conversation method of gang stalking, the dark neurolinguistic programming techniques of gang stalking, those are some of the three main things that are propped up through the community-based harassment, which is where the community is used to apply gang stalking techniques around the victim, concerning the victim, okay, and sometimes directly towards the victim and or their property. So gang stalking is a crime that concerning the community-based harassment is a crime And remote neural monitoring can also be used for visual entrainment, and voice to skull can be used for auditory entrainment. So when the victim is forced to see and or hear what they've been sensitized to, hold on, excuse me please, the victim knows that these things are being propped up intentionally through this crime. Therefore, a pattern starts to emerge mentally in the victim's mind to be associated and correlated to this crime. So once they, and trust me, if you're a victim of this crime who's experiencing remote neural monitoring, the psychotic rats who are hosting this, they're able to determine remotely that the victim is responding to it, meaning that they're able to determine that the victim is identifying what's being propped up. Now, once they create these negative associations between the technique that is applied around them, concerning them, and or directly towards them, then they are, because any human being can be sensitized to anything if it's got a negative and or positive correlation to it. Let me give you just a real fast example. Say if you get married in 1980, and on your wedding day, your wedding song is Endless Love, either by Diana Ross or Barbra Streisand. 20 years later, one of those two members of the spouses might get in their car to go to work. They get in their car, they turn it on, they turn on the radio, and the song Endless Love is playing. Now, what will happen is that as a result of that being an anchored association to a positive event, that will immediately stimulate what is known as residual memories of that wedding day, because the song is positively correlated to that event. Okay? Let me give you an example of a negative association. Okay, so in gangstalking, they will intentionally anchor things in the victim's mind to be intentionally associated and correlated to the crime itself, because that's how sensitization works. So what these little psychotic rats will do is, like, here's an example that's already on the internet right now. If you go to Google and type in gangstalking, rape, shoving a sock in the victim's mouth as they're enduring it, and then what the perpetrators will do is that they will then prop up individuals to show that rape victim socks along that woman's route. Because as she was being raped, they shoved socks in her mouth. So then that's now a negative correlation to a physical object, to a traumatic event. Then on subsequent days, the psychotic human trafficking, mass murdering animals who host this will prop up individuals along that woman's route to prop up and force her to see socks being presented around her routes everywhere she goes. She gets on a bus, she sits down. The next bus stop, an individual gets on, sits directly in front of her or across from her, and takes out a pair of socks. They know that her visually seeing the socks will stimulate the memory of the rape. And so there's your negative correlation. That then starts to become what is known as visual entrainment. Every time the victim recognizes that this is being propped up intentionally, the victim has a mental response, which produces a emotional response and a thinking response. And as a direct result of a thinking response and an emotional response being intentionally excited, the brain then creates what is known as an entrained pathway and an entrained neural network. So let me give you an idea about what an entrained pathway can look like physically in a rudimentary way. Now, do you see this line right here? Now, or better yet, say if you're in a park and you're driving your bicycle and you decide to get off of the trail at the park and ride your bike on the lawn, the grass part of the park. Now, you do that on one day. Say you're going back and forth to your house and you're taking the park to get back and forth. If you start riding your bike on the grass back and forth each day, eventually a little trail is going to appear on that grass. Well, every time a gangstalking victim experiences something being propped up that's been associated to a negative event, intentionally correlated, then what the brain does is it produces a thinking response, an emotional response, and will also stimulate the disassociation the brain went into as they were experiencing the initial trauma. So every time that the prop is propped up that's associated to that original event, the brain will excite a response. It will excite a thinking response, it will excite an emotional response. Every time it's continued to be propped up, it creates a neural pathway, just like that line you see there. And then every time it's continued to be propped up, it reinforces it. As a direct result of the reinforcement, That entrained pathway produces what is known as a potentiated frequency output from it. So therefore, every time that the stimuli is propped up and the brain recognizes it, the potentiated frequency will fire and it will start vibrating. That's when R&M then identifies it and latches onto it. Because when they prop up these psychotic animals along the victim's route to represent what the victim has been sensitized to, they already know that the victim is going to recognize that that's associated to and correlated to the initial trauma, this is all called anchoring. Now, you got to remember, when these props are propped up, there's an extreme likelihood that the psychotic rats who are hosting this are in the area of the victim. Okay? And what they're doing then is they're monitoring, remote neural monitoring the brain so they can see that frequency fire when the prop is propped up. As a direct result, they're able to then identify the potentiated frequency, the fact that they're able to heterodyne, literally harvest the potentiated frequency amount from this potentiated frequency. And then they store it. So basically, the goal of entrainment is to create entrained brainwaves, because that's basically what an entrained pathway is. An entrained pathway can become an unentrained neural network if the entrained pathway has a thinking response, which is an EEG signature, and an emotional response, which is an emotional cluster frequency signature. So therefore, then it becomes a network, meaning that the entrained pathway will also be attached to a resulting emotion. So that then becomes a network from the EEG signature frequency and then the emotional cluster frequency. So now it becomes a neural network. And so when these little psychotic rats who are hosting these mass murdering, human trafficking, raping, gang raping whores, okay, when they perpetrate this crime against the victim, they have exacting specific unique goals. They know exactly what they're doing. Okay, so this, as a result of keeping the victim entrapped in this game, which is called CIA hypergame theory, the victim is their own brain and their own electrophysiological signals are intentionally being purposely induced in order to create the entrainment, in order to brain map the victim, okay, and for neural hacking, including for heterodyning what's entrained, the frequency output response. So when you look at the fact that Brian 2 and many others are openly exposing the CIA, the NSA, the DOD, and the DIA as being the main responsible whores for this crime, but they're also exposing other people like fusion centers, state, county, and local police, and many others. We can then say to ourselves, because think about this, there's literally tens and tens of thousands of victims in America right now complaining on a daily scale on every social online platform that you can think of. The great majority of them have tried to call the police and the FBI, and not one case has been investigated. Not one. So, do you really think that's an accident? Because law enforcement is supposed to be investigating crimes, not protecting it and even participating in it, like the staged arrest, the staged events that lead to arrest, the staged events that lead to tickets, the intentional staged events that are designed in order to petition the victim into a psychiatric ward so they can be discredited on paper, okay? That way, if the victim ever sues any of these wild whores, they can say, well, we believe Miss Williams or whoever else might be complaining has got a mental illness, so let's petition through the courts her records so we can see if she does. And then so they do that, and they already know the falsified mental diagnoses are on their record, and so they use that as a fallback position for plausible deniability. Absolutely. Okay? So we can see how these six satanic rats work in a cooperating, cohesive, colluding relationship to affect their crimes and then to protect them, because these satanic whores are literally connected in every aspect of the system and out and about in the community. Okay? Who's the wild whores that are intentionally, okay, colluding with businesses of every kind? Libraries, universities. Who are they? I wonder who they could be. Anyone at any time can research my descriptions and you will see truth, because the only way you're going to see truth is by hearing the crime itself, being detailed, researching the descriptions, and then you'll be able to construct the crime in your mind in order to end up with a holistic pictorial representation concerning what the crime is. The details are deconstructing the crime. When you research the details, you will then come up with the construction of the crime, how it works, because that's all this crime is a construct. a construct that is intentionally perpetrated and affected upon the individual's life and their experiences in order to achieve these and other goals. Now, let me see where I'm at time-wise. So I'm already 15 minutes into this video. So let me segue into another thing, okay, concerning what these wild rats do. Hey, how you doing? Are you gonna fix the water machine? Is it broke? No. Okay, so anyways, here's a great example of what they can do to any and all gang-stalking victims. It's already widely exposed on the internet that these satanic whores who host this crime will intentionally make the victims homeless. Oh, absolutely. And they will literally use anybody and everybody to assist in the tracking of the victim, including many other. So just when you research the covert surveillance connected to this crime and all the different wild animals that they'll use to assist them in any and all aspects of it, then I think you're going to be able to see that the only entity that can perpetrate this crime, the only one that's got the power to create all this covert collusion. Think about it. If you go to a library, a gas station, a post office, a grocery store, and the victim is subject to the stimuli every single place they go, the only entity that has the power to do that is the government. The government is the only one that's got that power. They are the only ones to protect the crimes, and they are the only ones that can effect to make sure that the victim gets no help in any way, shape, or form. They are the only ones. So, that means there's breadcrumbs laying around in the neighborhood. If you can privately collude with a post office, a grocery store, a bank, a homeless shelter, okay, then whoever is colluding with them is leaving breadcrumbs. That means the people they're using got to lie. So do you think it's possible to intentionally affect perjury? Of course it is. Hold on a second. Of course it is, but I'm not going to detail that in this particular video. Now, so let me give you an example. Say if the victim already starts to recognize the patterns of their behaviors, because pattern recognition is needed for the entrainment. Meaning that when they prop up identical harassment, identical staged events, identical types of people that are used for staged events and harassment, identical places, they know the victim is going to recognize it, because any victim of this crime, any person on this planet can be sensitized to recognize patterns that are intentionally perpetrated and affected upon the victim themselves and through their perceptions, their sight and their hearing. So they know the victim is going to notice it. Anybody can be sensitized to anything if it's got a positive and or a negative correlation to it. It's just the way it works. It's the way the human brain works. In fact, check this out. Recently, I just discovered a video on Twitter. And this video was on Twitter was of a bunch of black and white cows. And they literally adopted a black and white dog and was nursing it and taking care of it and everything. Why? Because the cows would live together, and therefore they would be able to visually see that their fellow cows were black and white. So when they seen the black and white dog, they just correlated that in their mind to be part of the same family and adopted it and took care of it. They even slept together. Well, gang-stalking crimes, they know all this. They know what it takes to correlate identical patterns in a human being's mind, which is why this crime will intentionally create identical perpetrated crimes, identical perpetrated propped up props, so the victim sees and or hears them. Absolutely. So, let me give you an example about this. If the victim becomes extremely educated concerning these wild whores and what they do, then they are able to determine that through remote neuromonitoring. Because remote neuromonitoring monitors all the biological and electrophysiological and neuronal systems. So if the victim is identifying what they're enduring, and identification of the patterns are necessary. Okay, so for the entrainment. So if they see that the victim is becoming extremely educated, what these satanic rats will do is they'll put the victim in a bottleneck parameter of options so that the victim cannot get out of the game. Meaning that, but not limited to, if they make the victim homeless. They know they can track that victim to wherever they're staying at, wooded area, whatever, and then employ techniques to make it appear that somebody's stumbling across the victim and that the victim better move or they might be arrested. Right? And so they know they can control that circumstance by and through the corrupt organized crime cops who play a role in this. Google the police and gang stalking. Okay? So what these wild whores will do is make the victim homeless intentionally and then track them to wherever they're resting at and stage events using anybody of any age at any time, anywhere. That is the gang of gangstalking, where they're using more than one person. Absolutely. And everything is covered up by and through the private covert collusion and secrecy. Without it, they could not affect this crime, not 1 second of it. So, if they can trap the victim in a circumstance, say if a victim goes to a wooded area and puts up a tent, they leave for the day and come back and they got a bunch of social deviants set up on the property who intentionally make sure the victim sees and or hears them, then that's forcing the victim into only 2 options. Leave, pack up their shit and leave, and or try to get these people out of the area. Well, if they keep staging those types of identical events, that becomes a pattern recognition. It's identified by the victim because every time they do it, they do identical behaviors. That then becomes an identification of the pattern of the behavior. Because why do you think in gang stalking crimes, these 6 satanic whores will keep repeating the same exact identical shit? What do you think that is? Because they know through propping up identical stuff, the victim is going to recognize the patterns. Pattern recognition. So you should research the 2 hypotheses. Pattern recognition and identifying the patterns is how the entrainment takes place. Okay, which then results in the neural hacking. Okay, so if they know that they can force the victim to experience these experiences, they know that the victim where the victim went to in the woods. They know that when they can even determine through R&M that you left her tent up. Why is it on the internet that remote neural monitoring allows these satanic whores to see through the eyes of the victim and hear through their ears? So if the victim wakes up and packs up and says, I'm going to go to the grocery store, they can see that the victim left their tent up. So then they say, okay, the victim left their tent up, we'll prop up a bunch of social deviants to hang out 400 feet away from it. The victim goes back to the area and they immediately recognize somebody's on the property. So that leaves only then the victim with 2 options. The victim either approaches the people or yells to the people and says, hey, you need to get out of here. And then any type of event can transpire. Or the people that are used for it can then engage themselves in the behaviors they know the victim is going to identify to be related to this crime. So then when the victim gets out their phone and takes a video picture of it, what's also being captured? The landscape. The victim uploads that video to YouTube, and then the cops can use it against them later by using a normal apparent excuse. Oh, well, we found out your YouTube video is online because someone let us know. Well, who's that someone? Well, in order to find out their name, you're going to have to subpoena them. Habeas corpus. Okay? So once that victim starts experiencing that type of event, they'll repeat it. Now then the victim starts to become anxious. Are they going to start stealing my property? Are they going to start stealing my camping gear? Because they've done that in the past and intentionally let the victim know it was done through gang stalking. That's a fucking literally. Consider this. Say if you got a homeless person and they're camping in a wooded area and then they hide their property. The victim then goes back to it and there's a mound of dirt that is completely foreign to that immediate area and even the surrounding area. The victim then goes into their property and discovers that the property has been slashed up, closed, and or property is damaged and or missing. And then they place the mound of dirt 1 inch away from where they hid the property at, right? Now, so then when that is repeated, they know they're creating a negative correlation in the victim's mind because they created what is known as a visual calling card. Every time the victim then sees that pile of dirt next to their shit, then that's telling the victim that these psychotic rats know where your shit is and that am I going to face another theft and or damage to my property. That then excites the thinking response and the emotion response and boom, there you go. Okay, there goes the entrainment. So Brian too exposes the fact that, and many other doctors and scientists are saying the same thing, that by creating these negative correlations to an event, you hide your shit, you go back to it, something's missing, damaged, or stolen, and there's a mound of dirt there that was not there before. That's 2 feet high and 2 feet wide. That's their visual calling card to the act. Then the victim goes to 19 other places and hides their shit, same thing. That creates then the pattern recognition. Therefore, every time the victim sees the mound of dirt, that entrained pathway through the pattern recognition becomes stimulated, and then remote neural monitoring latches on the potentiated frequency output that fires when the victim knows the visual anchor, visual and auditory brain entrainment. So anybody at any time can be used for gang stalking crimes. You just never can tell. Oh, absolutely. So, my fellow American citizens, once you become entrained in this crime, you can then become nearly enslaved for any way, in any way, shape, or form. Okay? Do you really believe that it's an accident that gang stalking is all over the internet to be directly connected to and widely exposed to be directly connected to racketeering schemes, insurance fraud schemes, sexual human trafficking, mass murder, torture, human experimentation, and much more? Do you honestly think for 1 second nothing's going on when tens of thousands of people are reporting it, yet 99% of all these people have never talked to each other? So, I wanted to throw this out there because the people... What do you think I'm enduring at Wooded areas? Because these little psychotic rats, these raping, mass murdering whores made me homeless from 4 apartments in Michigan and 1 in Tennessee. Why do you think that they created this crime and created the homelessness? So they can play these types of games while using social deviants, punks, criminals, crazies, lowlifes. They'll use anybody of any age, from children to teenagers to senior citizens to neighbors to public workers to property owners to police to anybody. They will literally use anybody. Now you know the gang of gang stalking. The stalking is illegal GPS tracking. And they will lie right through their teeth, right to your face. They'll lie on any police report or any other type of documentations, from doctors to courts to police. They will literally use anybody and everybody of any age, any type of person, anywhere, at all times. They're hiding behind the police, that's for damn sure. And they're using the police as well. So I made this video to inform, to expose truth. Research my statements, baby cakes. Research them in-depthly with a mature posture. And you will eventually come up with a comprehensive understanding concerning what I expose. By and through taking the data from each described description, researching it in-depthly, taking that information from each description, the data from it, and then going to the next description and researching it. And then once you get a more holistic understanding, you'll get a more holistic understanding as a result of tying the information together, synthesizing it together to see the construct of this crime. So, if you don't cooperate with their them exciting responses out of you by propping up identical shit for you to endure, that's then called non-cooperative hypergang theory. But many victims are saying they're not being allowed to not cooperate. So, you should research voice to skull in gang stalking. You should research voice to skull with voice morphing in gang stalking. Say if they sensitize a gang stalking victim to the color red, and the victim knows they're propping up red along their routes. The victim then makes the mental choice, well, I'm not going to mentally respond to it. I'll just ignore it. So say if you prop up a person wearing red that comes out of the grocery store, okay, and the victim totally ignores it. Well, if that victim is experiencing voice to skull with voice morphing, when that prop is propped up, what they can then do is use V2K with voice morphing so that the victim will hear in their own mind, in their audio cortex, in their own voice print, what an asshole. Okay? So they're literally forcing it up on the brain. They're not allowing the brain not to respond. So how do you then entrap these wild animals? Well, you do not allow them to participate in non-cooperative hypergame theory when you throw them into each other by forcing them into actions to defend themselves, forcing them into retaliation because of exposures, and then predict it first. Absolutely. Wild animal whores got to lie in court in order to protect their crimes. So you bait them to engage in their crimes. You predict it first, and then bait them to, hook them, okay? And then when they lie in court about it, and the judge and the prosecutor and all these other wild organized crime demonic asses don't allow you discovery of materials of discovery, which is evidence, if they don't allow your evidence to be seen in court, and they got to lie to protect their wild asses, that's perjury, that's obstruction of justice, that's collusion, that's conspiracy. These are all Class A felonies. So you can push them into non-cooperative hypergang theory by bottlenecking, okay, their responses. Inducing them, predict what they'll do first, inducing them, okay, and then when they lie to cover up, predict that too. Everybody have a great day, because you never can tell at any time, anywhere, where these psychotic horrors will prop up and use anybody at any time, anywhere, for anything that they prop up concerning gang stalking crimes. Have a good day.